Welcome back to Stacks, the best show for crypto investors. Today, I'm joined by Eric Balchunas, Senior ETF Analyst over at Bloomberg, and James Seyffert over at Bloomberg Intelligence. If there is something going on with Bitcoin ETFs, this is the clearest answer I'm going to get, because I've been scrolling Twitter and I can't figure it out. How you guys doing this morning?
Good. Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Eric, last time we talked was February, and it's that time of year again. Bitcoin ETF talk is it's in the air. Bitcoin investors are hoping for it. It's been the worst start to the year, worst month we've ever had for Bitcoin. And last time we talked, I think you gave like a 5 or 10% chance of it passing this year. It was a very small chance. And before we talk about the new news that just happened yesterday, Grayscale suing the SEC, I want to understand, I just want to remember, why did you think there was such a small chance of it passing this year? Like, has anything changed there?
Yeah, I mean, as we've always been doing, is just really, when we look at how we create our odds, we give a lot of weight to Gensler's own words. So he's been pretty clear, and Gensler's words are what drove us to be so bullish on the futures ETF. And that we've just stuck, we use a couple other metrics, but that's the big one. And he's been very clear that he just views futures as under regulatory oversight. So they're okay, no matter what futures, it seems like. Whereas Bitcoin, it's almost like you got to picture Bitcoin sort of out of this sort of like enclosed space that's under regulatory oversight. Bitcoin is over there. He calls it the Wild West. And over he said that. So people have asked him point blank this question. He's like, well, just we need to have more regulatory oversight over there to protect from fraud and manipulation, which again ties in with the disapproval letters. And so we just became as bearish on the spot approval as we were bullish on the futures one. We left a 5 to 10% chance at the beginning of the year opening, just because you never know. There's a little politics in here. Gensler could be replaced. There's a bunch of stuff that could happen. We also thought there would be a proposal or something that would come out that might be fast tracked, where it would create some regulatory oversight in the spot Bitcoin market. And if that happens, then it's possible they would fast track the spot approval. And that's ultimately been what we're waiting for. We need the horse before the cart, right? We need to have the regulatory something, anything, before we can even begin to talk spot. So then when the Grayscale was an isolated prediction, we only gave that 0.5% a chance. So we only left the 0.5 just as some miracle, but it was pretty much a 99.5% chance of not happening. Even though I could tell there was a good amount of hopium out there, Grayscale seemed to be sending messages that it could happen, but we were like, no, they're just, everybody's just, it's all wishful thinking. There's no reason at all to think the SEC would change its tune now. And Gensler, you have to understand, he's a Democrat, likes regulation, and he's got the mind of a lawyer. So it's all about technical details and regulatory oversight and government having more control. So all this just really feeds into our negativity. And believe me, we don't want to feel this way. We just want to be right. We think they should have approved it 8 years ago. I mean, we're like, we know ETFs rule, and if anything, ETFs would bring a lot of sort of grassroots oversight, because exchanges would not want to not get included with the market makers who are making markets in the ETFs. They'd want to be part of that ecosystem, so they would clean up any issues. The ETF, honestly, is the answer the SEC is looking for. It's just so ironic, but the ETF doesn't give Gensler the control.
What would spur us getting that regulatory framework? Like, does that just come out of nowhere? Does Gensler wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to make these guys happy? Or does it, like, what makes that happen?
The thing that they keep saying, and they've been saying from the get-go, they've said a lot of things that basically all these filers have whittled away. There's been all these different things. They want a 40 Act product, not a 33 Act product. They want all these things. But the one thing they've always said is what Eric said, they want a regulated market. They want what's called a regulated market of what they're calling of significant size, meaning like they need it to be a market that has a real impact on the underlying spot market. So it's like a real big player, or a group of markets that you could then say make up a market of significant size. So that's what the SEC has been saying and what they're going for. The other aspect of like, the one reason that I was like so confident they were going to deny is they approved a futures Bitcoin ETF in this spring, right, under the 33 Act. So basically, they approved a product that went through the same process as these spot Bitcoin ETFs. Futures, the products they approved in the fall, went through a separate process. So this was big. And they approved this product, which a lot of people didn't think was going to happen. But I thought it was going to be approved. But they went through and approved it. And they went back to that. They have to satisfy that whole thing where they've been saying they want a market of significant size. And they basically said to get through that like hang up, because CME futures are not a market of significant size. When you even look at Bitcoin futures on the world, they're not a market of significant size. When you look at crypto, they're not a market of significant size with pretty much anything. But the way they qualified it was they are a market of significant size with respect to the CME futures. So basically, they like, I couldn't believe when I read that sentence. I was like, oh my God. So when I saw that, I was like, Gensler and SEC are like preparing to deny spot Bitcoin ETFs because they were laying the groundwork for their defense against someone trying to say they're not being fair for the regular markets. So that was when after I saw that, I was like, there's no spot Bitcoin ETF getting approved because there was no reference to spot Bitcoin ETFs in the application. But in the denial letter, they were like, we're approving this futures product. And then they'd be like, but we're not going to approve a spot because it doesn't satisfy. And then like basically preempting the actuallys or defenses that they might come up with. So there was a lot of things happening there that they're just not going to approve.
I don't know if it was a book or movie, but it's like, he's just not that into you, or she's just not that into you. I forget, was that a movie? Like a
think it is.
Early 2000s movie. This is the sense I get. He's just not into it.
Yep.
At some point, I mean, it's like a guy who just cannot take no for an answer with all the filings. And ultimately, at some point, they will be open to this. But it's just we need a lot to happen first. Yeah.
So you asked about like what could get this happen. There's a bunch of things on the table that I could see this happening. I've said for this week, I've said multiple times, we could possibly get all these things that the SEC and Gensler want to happen before this Grayscale lawsuit is even finished, right? So the first thing, one thing that we're watching very closely is there was a lot of news about FTX proposing this new clearing model for futures.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they're going to use real-time 24/7 stuff. There was a Senate hearing. That's what got all the attention. But what we noticed, and we talked to people at FTX, and they even were tweeting about it, the way the model would work is there's this thing called I don't want to get too wonky in details, but essentially the way that model would work if they put it on the FTX system, the FTX exchange, it would bring spot Bitcoin markets from FTX under the CFTC regulatory oversight. So all of a sudden, all spot Bitcoin trading on FTX would become federally regulated. Now, that alone probably wouldn't satisfy the market of significant size, but if other exchanges followed, they could probably argue that that is a market of significant size, or potentially that in combination with CME futures would do it. So that's one area we're watching. And that's an example of an exchange voluntarily coming in and saying, we want to be regulated by the CFTC or the SEC. We know Gensler has said he's talking to exchanges constantly. He even like in an interview said there's conversations with 6 exchanges. So there could be this situation where voluntarily exchanges come in because let's be honest, there's a lot of these crypto tokens that fit the definitions of the security as far as I'm concerned. And even if you talk to the lawyers of these people who are trying to get them not classified as security, they'll admit to you off the record, yeah, this is kind of definitely in the gray area. So if these things start getting named securities, the SEC starts threatening to start naming all these things securities, exchanges might just be like, it's easier for me to register as an exchange or what's known as an ATS, alternative trading system, which falls under the SEC purview. And all of a sudden that satisfies the requirement. So there's the voluntary side of it. Then there's the force side where they start forcing them by naming these things securities. Even if we know what happened with Ripple, there's been this huge argument about whether it's security or not. Even if they fight that situation, do exchanges really want to be caught in the middle of like not being able to trade these things? So it might be easier for them to just, all right, we're an exchange, we'll register with the SEC, even if it's going to cost us millions of dollars to do so. So then also there's the Loomis-Gillibrand bill or just any sort of congressional action. Like if there's a lot of talk in Congress, we saw Biden issue the executive order. He basically wants all these federal agencies to get in line. So there's a lot of stuff on that front that could help like alleviate or push through some congressional action that would then force these exchanges, force whatever to get in line and come under the US's federal regulatory umbrella, if you will.
So there is a path forward. I've learned to just stop even hoping it's gonna pass this year because you guys have just been spot on. But there is some kind of path forward. Yesterday, there's some news that comes out, and this is the alternative path forward, which I think has a very slim chance based on us talking. But let's get into it. Grayscale yesterday sued the SEC. They hold $24 billion worth of Bitcoin. It's the largest Bitcoin fund in the world. It's a trust. And they're suing the SEC because the SEC denied their application. I'm going to play you guys a 1-minute clip, and then we can talk about what happened there. This is Michael Sunnasine. He is the CEO of Grayscale. He was on CNBC this morning. Here he is.
Is there a precedent for this sort of action to sue the SEC for a rejection? Well, Melissa, it's been a busy 12 hours for the Grayscale team. Of course, last night getting the SEC's decision, we were, of course, very disappointed, but as an organization, we were ready.
What is the core thrust of that suit? If you can just give me sort of the elevator pitch, so to speak, on why the SEC is wrong in this decision.
The SEC is acting arbitrary and capricious by continuing to approve Bitcoin futures-based ETFs while continuing to deny spot Bitcoin ETFs. And when you look at the Administrative Procedure Act, which is really what governs the way that regulators have to govern, they have to be treating like issues alike. And in this case, they're not. They're actually discriminating against issuers like Grayscale, who are trying to, bring a product further into the U.S. regulatory perimeter here.
Have you guys ever seen another ETF applicant suing the SEC, or is this just a crypto Wild West thing? We're bringing our wild rules into the traditional world.
I mean, I wouldn't say this is normal. Like, this isn't absurdly common, but the process that Grayscale is following is like a laid out process. This isn't some like wild West shooting from the hip. Like, this is like the way that it's meant to be done if you want to challenge a federal agency's decision. So it's not that. I don't know of any ETFs that have gone through this exact process. I know there's been some examples of issuers or exchanges threatening this path to get things approved, but never. I don't know. This is the first that I've ever seen where we're going to actually get a full lawsuit, and this is going to go to the DC circuit, and we can talk about the details of how that's going to work and timelines and stuff. But I would say definitely not like. It's not common, but it's also not like completely out of left field.
Also, let me just add to that, just from my coverage of the ETFs and study this market, first ETF ever filed, SPY, took 4.5 years to get approved. That had always been to me like this sort of crazy factoid about ETFs. 4.5 years, oh my God. We're now double that with the Bitcoin, that's 9. And this is also in a situation where we have so much more history of ETFs. Like SPY was the first of its kind. Here is a situation where it's double what SPY was, which was, in my recollection, the longest wait ever. So it's not only unprecedented in the suing of suing the SEC, but just 9 years is ridiculous. And also we've got not just 9 years where it filed and collected dust. We've had probably like 20 to 30 different issuers inside of that. And if you add up all the filings, it's probably been like 200 different filings.
Just crazy.
It is crazy. It's like a Kentucky Derby on steroids every 3 years. Because they all file, they get shut down, they come back, and now Van Eck has refiled, and we're about to start again. I'm so exhausted. I'm so burnt out of this topic. But we got to cover it, and I just wish they'd approve it already. Then we can start watching these things in the wild, and that'd be, I think, better for everybody.
Eric, one of the reasons that they keep denying, or I guess the two biggest reasons you highlighted in their denial letter, that they said the word manipulation 109 times. The second most common word was surveillance. That was 78 times. So they think this is manipulated and they need more surveillance. Has anything, those are just the two reasons, point blank.
Yeah, I mean, talk about overkill. I mean, all right, we get it. Manipulation, surveillance. I mean, these lawyers just write the same sentence 25 different times. I mean, do you need 89 pages to say no? I mean, honestly, it's all a little absurd, but clearly they're just trying to drive home the fact that this is what they're worried about. And somebody was asked, Gensler was on CNBC a week ago and was asked about risk in other markets. And he said, there's risk in all markets, including crypto, but in the other markets, they have sort of measures in place to protect from fraud and manipulation. He said those two words. So, and he goes, in crypto, you don't have that. And again, that just drives home the problem here, which is that there are no sort of consumer protections, investor protections from that.
Yeah.
I wish there was another way to analyze this, but that's just a part of the matter and the cold water here. There's just no way around that.
I think that the one confusion, though, that I have and that everyone has, last week, ProShares launched, or was it, I believe it was ProShares, they launched a short, this is an inverse Bitcoin ETF. Bitcoin's down 70% and it lets people short Bitcoin. But I'm saying, regardless of whether or not it's futures, I know it doesn't, so now Gensler can't kind of stop it. It's letting people short Bitcoin.
These are lawyers.
Yeah.
These are not normal people. They don't think in like logic, like, oh, why would we let somebody invest in Bitcoin futures, which could cost you 10 to 15% a year in rolling, or short it, which obviously now you have rolling and the daily resetting. There's a lot of math issues in these ETFs that normal people don't understand. It's way cleaner just to put out a spot product like GLD, and that's that's why this is so frustrating for us and gets so tiring, is that we know this is all kind of absurd, and it should seem absurd to any normal person. But this is, again, these are they're politicians and they're lawyers, and they just don't think a certain way. And this is where Hester Pierce, who is a commissioner who happens to be, a little contrarian, she writes about this constantly and says the same things we all feel. So there are some people in the commission who are, think this way. It just happens to be that he's the head of it, and the last guy also had similar feelings. So we either need regulation or a new head of the SEC, I think.
Before we wrap here, I'm going to end this on a positive note. James, I'm going to let you take this. There is a positive thing here. There is now, at least it looks like, a solution or a route that this can get passed. Either, James, through the steps that you outlined with FTX, or with this suing the SEC working. And suing the SEC, I think the strike rate of that working is pretty low. I think Mark Cuban won, but that was on insider trading. So I'm not holding my breath on this one. But what is the timeline? I think, Eric, you said next year there's a far bigger chance. James, you outlined some things. What's the timeline that you guys actually do think the chances are in our favor that a Bitcoin ETF passes?
Timeline-wise, for the APA lawsuit, we could get a decision as early as like the late first quarter next year, say March, something like that. So we could get a decision. And that I've talked to our litigation analyst. So we have a litigation analyst who's a former lawyer who's going to be covering this trial with us. So we'll be on top of that from that perspective. He says, so there's been people on Twitter saying this is just a frivolous lawsuit. I've talked to a couple lawyers, including our litigation analyst. This is not frivolous. This makes sense. Grayscale's definitely the underdog. He says SEC probably has like a 70% chance of winning if he had to put a number on it. But it's unlikely that they would win this. But the reason why we've said for the now over a year, I think that we thought like mid-summer, like summer 2023 at some point would be when we start to see the possibility that we get one of these launched next year. We're still hopeful for that because one, this lawsuit, which again, we don't think it's really going to happen, but I outlined tons of different ways that we could potentially see these exchanges, these spot markets come under the federally regulated umbrella.
Let me rephrase the question, and because I think people want odds. At what date, James, do you go over 50% odds?
Over 50% odds.
Yeah, and this is all with the caveat that we are a little in the dark here. This is a very
that's fair. That's fair.
The futures one, we had a lot more information. This is a little more basically trying to gauge the timeline of the government, which can be slow. So, James, where do you get to 50% odds?
50%, I'd say over 50% in 4Q 2020, or right around 50% in 4Q 2023, assuming there aren't some huge
4Q
hiccup.
2023.
Yeah, the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I'm a little more liberal. I would say probably 50% late summer 2023, but we're in the same ballpark.
I mean, that gives us at least something to hope for. I think that's the Bitcoin Spot ETF is the ultimate bull catalyst. And right now, we need something like that. We need it badly.
Something to hold on to. I know. That was I forget who wrote. That's a song. Anyway, bringing in my pop culture metaphors. But yeah, look, it will eventually happen.
Yeah.
It's just again, we need the government to do things, and the government's so slow, and just everything takes a while.
Yep. Gensler's vendetta, eventually that will end, or his reign will end, and we'll see this thing pass. We'll all rejoice, all the Bitcoin holders out there. Eric, I appreciate you coming on. James, thank you so much for the color. Appreciate you guys, and we'll chat soon. Hopefully next time we're talking, Bitcoin ETF has passed. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.